With Christmas just days away, my parents' sprawling mansion on Maple Avenue was glowing with holiday elegance. A towering 12-foot pine tree stood in the grand foyer, its branches adorned with shimmering Swarovski ornaments that cast a soft, golden light over the snow-covered landscape outside. The dining table, already set with Wedgwood china, held a meticulously planned Christmas dinner menu. My name is Jennifer Thompson. I work as a real estate agent in Greenwich and live about 15 minutes away in a newly developed neighborhood with my husband, David, and our 6-year-old son, Ethan. David, a mid-level manager at an IT firm, earns around $70,000 a year, not enough to be considered wealthy by Greenwich standards, but together, we've built a life filled with warmth and happiness. Ethan, an intelligent and kind-hearted boy, attends North Street School, where he's well-liked by his classmates. Inspired by my mother's years as a high school teacher, I've always valued education deeply. Helping Ethan with his homework and reading together in the evenings has become one of the most treasured parts of my day. Every Sunday, we gather at my parents' home for dinner, a long-standing tradition in our family. My parents, Charles and Eleanor, take pride in the successful marriages of my siblings. My older sister, Caroline, is married to a prominent cardiac surgeon. My younger sister, Julia, practices law, and my youngest brother, Henry, is a university professor. Their spouses meet my parents' definition of suitable partners. Our family home, a stately white Victorian built in the 1920s, stands as a testament to Greenwich's heritage. My father, a retired investment banker, and my mother, a leading figure in the town's social circles, maintain their reputation through philanthropy and their active role in the First Presbyterian Church. Together, we siblings take on various responsibilities to support them. Caroline ensures they receive priority medical care at Greenwich Hospital. I manage contracts and home maintenance. Julia handles their legal affairs, and Henry oversees their investments. Yet, despite the picture-perfect image of our family, one detail has been gnawing at me. Lately, Ethan has been reluctant to visit his grandparents. "Mom, do I have to go to Grandma's house?" His small voice carried a hesitation that tugged at my heart. My parents, who shower their other grandchildren with extravagant gifts and enroll them in expensive lessons, have always seemed distant when it comes to Ethan. At Greenwich Women's Club luncheons, my mother gushes about Caroline's twins and Julia's daughter, but she barely mentions my son. It stings. Our home, though modest in comparison to my parents' grand estate, is filled with something their house lacks: genuine warmth. David and I deliberately chose our modern colonial-style home, and while it may not boast the same grandeur, it holds something far more precious: the joy of everyday life. Weekends are spent playing catch with Ethan at the park, grilling in the backyard, and making memories that don't require wealth, just love. Why can't my parents see the value in that? I knelt beside Ethan and wrapped my arms around him. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mom and Dad are always here for you." As I held him close, I made a quiet promise to myself: this Christmas, no matter what, I would protect my son. Standing on our balcony, I looked out over the rows of horse chestnut trees in the rose garden, a familiar unease creeping over me as I thought about the upcoming family gathering. On Christmas afternoon, as we pulled up to my parents' house, I spotted Caroline's luxury SUV already parked in the driveway. Stepping out of the car, Ethan fidgeted with the collar of his red sweater, his small fingers squeezing mine a little tighter. "I don't want to go," he whispered. David, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder, forced a smile. "It's okay, buddy. I bet Santa left something special for you inside." His voice was gentle, but I could hear the tension beneath it. As we pushed open the heavy front door, a wave of warmth rushed over us, carrying the scents of roast turkey, cinnamon, and pumpkin pie. The massive 24-pound butterball turkey was already crisping in the oven. "Jenny, you finally made it." My mother swept into the foyer, her white cashmere sweater and pearl necklace gleaming under the soft chandelier light. She kissed me lightly on the cheek but barely spared Ethan a glance. "You're late," she scolded. "Caroline's children have been here for ages." From the living room, bursts of laughter and excited voices filled the air. Underneath the massive Christmas tree sat an extravagant pile of colorfully wrapped presents. Caroline's twins were immersed in the latest gaming console, while Julia's daughter was already engrossed in her brand new tablet, learning to code. "Merry Christmas, Patricia," my father called from across the room, a glass of scotch in hand. Patricia. That name again. My maiden name. Even after all these years, he still refused to acknowledge my married name, as if calling me Thompson was an admission of a choice he disapproved of. "Ethan, come here." Caroline waved him over with a bright smile. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. Another Christmas at my parents' house had begun. My sister always treated Ethan with the same kindness she showed to the other children, but today, there was something different in her expression, a flicker of guilt, a quiet apology she couldn't voice. "That sweater, did you get it at Target?" My mother's sharp eyes swept over Ethan, her voice laced with thinly veiled disdain. Yes, it was a $25 sweater from Target. But what did that matter? Ethan had been so proud of his red sweater, choosing it himself with the excitement only a 6-year-old could muster. As the evening moved toward dinner, the house buzzed with lively conversation. Henry, always the intellectual, engaged in discussions befitting his role as a young professor. Julia entertained with amusing stories from her law firm, and Caroline's husband enthusiastically explained the latest advancements in medical technology. My parents listened intently, their expressions glowing with approval. But when David began speaking about his work, my father merely grunted before steering the conversation elsewhere. Ethan, eager to join in, started sharing a story about school. Before he could finish his sentence, my mother interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "Let's save the children's stories for later." The dinner table, meticulously arranged with Wedgwood china, displayed a feast worthy of a magazine cover. At its center, the perfectly roasted turkey gleamed under the chandelier's soft light, accompanied by homemade cranberry sauce, green bean casserole, sweet potato casserole, and Whole Foods signature pumpkin pies. "Let us say grace," my father announced, prompting everyone to bow their heads and fold their hands. "Lord, we thank you for this bountiful meal, our successful children, and our wonderful grandchildren." Even within the words of gratitude, an invisible divide loomed, an unspoken hierarchy of worth within the family. After dinner came the much-anticipated exchange of gifts. The entire family gathered around the grand fireplace as my mother began distributing presents. First, Caroline's children unwrapped large boxes revealing the latest gaming consoles and designer outfits. Julia's children received educational tablets, while Henry's child was gifted premium sports equipment and a high-end programming kit. The air filled with their delighted chatter. Finally, it was Ethan's turn. "Here, Ethan. Your turn," my mother said, holding out a small, neatly wrapped box. Ethan's eyes gleamed with excitement as he carefully peeled away the wrapping. I held my breath, watching. He lifted the lid of the box. And found nothing. "He doesn't need anything," my mother said with a cold smile. The room fell into stunned silence. Large tears welled up in Ethan's eyes and rolled down his cheeks. I looked at my mother, my gaze burning with unspoken fury, but I said nothing. Words were unnecessary. Instead, I stood, wrapped my arms around my son, and led him out of the room. David silently followed. Behind us, an oppressive silence settled, punctuated only by Caroline's quiet sigh. As we walked toward the front door, my eyes drifted to the family portraits lining the hallway. Smiling faces, happy moments, at least, that's what they had once seemed. Now, they felt like fabrications, illusions of a family that had never truly existed. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the world in an eerie stillness. In the car's rearview mirror, the glow of holiday lights shimmered across the neighborhood, yet they felt hollow, devoid of warmth. My parents' mansion shrank in the distance as we drove away. In the back seat, Ethan sniffled, rubbing his tears away with the sleeve of his beloved red sweater. "Hey, Ethan," David said gently as he drove. Mommy and Daddy love you very much. That will never change, no matter what Grandma and Grandpa think. The next morning, before dawn, my phone buzzed relentlessly. The family group chat had erupted with messages, a flood of anger and disbelief. Caroline's message appeared first. What happened last night is completely unacceptable. Julia followed. As a lawyer, I can't ignore this. Our parents' actions amount to clear emotional abuse. Even Henry, usually the most composed of us all, sent an uncharacteristically raw response. I would never treat even my students this way. Then came my parents' reply, cutting and unforgiving. Patricia's choices led to this. This is what happens when you marry someone with such limited education. I stared at the screen, my grip tightening around my phone. Beside me, Ethan slept fitfully, his small body curled against my side. He had woken multiple times throughout the night, haunted by nightmares, eventually seeking comfort in our bed. Later that day, my siblings and I gathered at Julia's law office in Manhattan. Through the high-rise windows, Greenwich's skyline lay shrouded in a soft haze. Let me first explain from a legal standpoint, Julia began, opening her laptop. Discriminatory treatment of grandchildren by their grandparents can, in some cases, be grounds for legal action. But that's a last resort. Caroline, her doctor's composure intact, folded her arms. What we need now are effective consequences for our parents. A hush fell over the room as we exchanged glances. For the first time, it was clear this wasn't just about last night. It was about years of silent mistreatment, of wounds left to fester under the guise of tradition. And this time, we weren't going to let it go. Henry stood at the whiteboard, methodically listing out the various ways we had been supporting our parents. I've calculated the impact on their lifestyle if we withdraw our assistance with Sunday dinners, medical transportation, and home maintenance management, he said, pointing to a spreadsheet on his laptop. Our contributions are what have allowed them to maintain their luxurious way of life. Caroline let out a tired sigh. I wonder if they even realize we've been the ones covering their Greenwich Country Club dues all this time. Not to mention the church charity events, Julia added. They've been credited with generosity they never actually financed. That afternoon, we put our plan into action. Caroline made the first call, reaching out to our parents' primary physician. I'm sorry, but we'll have to discontinue transportation support for their appointments, she informed the office. Next, Julia contacted the home maintenance company. We won't be renewing our parents' regular maintenance contract. Please adjust your records accordingly. Meanwhile, Henry called their investment advisor. I'd like my name removed from my parents' account management. Effective immediately. The consequences spread faster than we expected, particularly within the Greenwich Women's Club private group, where the Christmas party incident became the talk of the town. One by one, our mother's longtime friends began distancing themselves. The effects rippled into their church community as well. Quietly and without public announcement, our parents were removed from charity event committees. The whispers of the church ladies became impossible to ignore. Even their mansion began showing signs of neglect. The once perfectly manicured rose garden grew untamed, roof leaks went unrepaired, and when the heating system broke down, there was no contractor left to call. Tax documents piled up, untouched. Had our parents truly never realized just how much we had been handling for them? How's Ethan? Caroline asked one evening, her voice full of concern. He's getting better, I replied. David practices baseball with him every night. The love around him seems to be helping him heal. My kids want to play with Ethan, too, Julia said warmly. Why don't we have a hot chocolate party at my house this weekend? And so, the cousins gathered, laughing and playing together, blissfully unaware of the complexities of the adult world. Their kindness, their simple and unaffected joy, slowly helped mend Ethan's wounded heart. One snowy evening, I stood by the window, watching the quiet street outside. Days had passed without a single call from my parents. A small part of me wondered if we had made the right decision, but each time I saw Ethan's bright, unburdened smile, I knew we had. Shortly after the new year began, unexpected visitors arrived at our doorstep. When I opened the door, my parents stood there, looking like strangers. My mother's perfectly styled hair was now unkempt, and my father, always dressed in impeccable suits, wore an aging cashmere sweater. They both seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. "Patricia, will you hear us out?" my mother asked. Her voice, usually laced with arrogance, was quiet and uncertain. I led them into the living room, where David silently set out coffee. Upstairs, Ethan played in his room, the lingering scent of breakfast toast still in the air. My father spoke first. "The truth is, we're struggling to manage." From there, their troubles unraveled before us. Without the hospital transportation, my father had missed his regular checkups. Without the home maintenance contract, their once pristine house was now in disrepair. Bills, including late notices for tax preparation, had begun piling up. "But your pension," I started to say. My mother broke down in tears, clutching her handkerchief. "It's not enough. We've been living beyond our means, keeping up appearances." My father hesitated before pulling a bill from his wallet, a payment reminder from Greenwich Country Club. "Our friends have abandoned us. We've lost our place in the church." Tears streamed down my mother's face, her once flawless makeup smudging. "Did you know? Did you know that we couldn't survive without your help?" "Yes," I said simply. "We knew." "But why, Ethan?" she whispered. Her expression shifted, no longer one of dismissal, but something more complicated. Pride and regret, tangled together. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I'll be honest," she admitted. "I could never accept your marriage. A daughter of a prominent Greenwich family, marrying a mere IT manager." David remained silent, his presence steady beside me. I met her gaze, my voice unwavering. "But David is a wonderful husband. And an even better father." She nodded slowly, turning to gaze out the window as she continued. "But I had my pride," my mother admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My position in society, my reputation at church, the watchful eyes of my friends." She hesitated before exhaling shakily. "And then there was Ethan. That child, he was a constant reminder of the marriage that went against all our expectations." Father cut in abruptly, his voice firm. "No, Eleanor. That's wrong." Mother turned to him, startled. He had never interrupted her like this before. "We were wrong," he continued, his voice unsteady. "Our vanity and pride blinded us to what truly matters." He ran a hand down his face, as if exhausted by the weight of his own realization. "We lived in comfort because of your support. And how did we repay you? With cruelty." Mother remained silent, clutching her handkerchief like a lifeline. Father's head bowed low. "We apologize," he said, his voice trembling. "To Ethan. And to your family." For the first time in my life, I saw true humility in my father. "But my mother," she hesitated. Her fingers clenched the delicate fabric of her handkerchief, her lips pressing together. "But our social standing," she murmured. A small noise interrupted the tense moment. All of us turned toward the staircase. Ethan sat halfway up the stairs, his little feet dangling over the edge. How long had he been there? How much had he heard? "Grandma." His voice was small, but it carried through the silent room. "Why don't you like me?" The air seemed to freeze. Mother's breath caught. She looked at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time, not as a symbol of defiance, not as a threat to her social world, but as what he truly was, an innocent child, her grandson. Her lips trembled. I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered. For the first time, the carefully constructed mask my mother had worn for years cracked and fell away. Ethan climbed down the stairs and stood in front of her, his eyes searching hers with pure sincerity. "Don't cry, Grandma," he said softly. Then, with a small smile, he added, "I have my red sweater. You can borrow it." The room stood still. And then, with a sharp, broken sob, my mother crumbled. She dropped to her knees, heedless of her expensive dress or her ruined makeup, and wept openly. Father turned toward the window, staring out at the falling snow, his back rigid with emotion. "Would you give us a chance?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I met David's eyes. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "But there are conditions," I said, facing my parents. "You must truly accept Ethan and our way of life, not for appearances, not for status, but because you mean it. From your hearts." My parents nodded. No grand promises, no dramatic declarations. Just a silent agreement that, for the first time, held real weight. Change wouldn't happen overnight. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different. 3 months passed. My parents' home on Maple Avenue no longer radiated its former grandeur. Their Greenwich Country Club membership had lapsed, the once pristine Wedgwood china set was listed for sale, and the weekly housekeeping services had been quietly cancelled. Now, they tended their own rose garden. Mother, dressed in work gloves from the hardware store instead of her usual designer ones, let out a small sigh as she pulled a stubborn weed from the soil. "What is true happiness, really?" she murmured. Father, once a proud investment banker, had taken a volunteer position as a bookkeeper at the local senior center. Though the role was unpaid, I had never seen his face look so at peace. Money and status weren't everything after all, he admitted one afternoon, tossing a baseball to Ethan in the backyard. His voice carried something new, something that had never been there before. Regret. And realization. Change had come, slowly but surely. Now, instead of grand Sunday dinners at the mansion, my parents came to our home every Saturday. The meals weren't extravagant, but the warmth in the room made them feel richer. "Look, Grandma." Ethan grinned, holding up a drawing. "I made this for you." And for the first time, my mother smiled, not for show, not for society, but simply because her grandson was handing her a piece of his world. And this time, she accepted it. When Ethan proudly shows my mother his family drawing from school, small tears shimmer in her eyes. "It's beautiful, Ethan," she whispers. "May I hang it in my room?" There is no trace of arrogance in her voice, only sincerity. Slowly, life has settled into a new rhythm. Caroline has resumed coordinating medical appointments, Julia has restarted legal consultations, and Henry now oversees their more modest finances. But this time, the dynamic has changed. The support we offer comes with boundaries, with an understanding that respect and love must be mutual. "Love should be unconditional," Julia declared during one of our sibling meetings. "But support needs conditions." And so, a new system was put in place, a structured plan to sustain our parents' retirement, this time grounded in responsibility. The expectations and promises were formally documented in a notarized agreement. Of course, not everything has been seamless. Old habits die hard, and there are moments when my mother finds herself tempted by the lure of appearances, especially when invited to social events by her former circle of friends. But each time, my father gently reminds her, "Eleanor, remember what truly matters." At First Presbyterian Church, my parents no longer sit in the front row, basking in admiration. Instead, they've chosen seats in the back, ordinary parishioners seeking real faith rather than superficial status. "We strayed from God's teachings," my father confessed to the pastor one Sunday. Caroline, witnessing the moment, said later that it was the most honest she had ever seen him. After stepping away from the Greenwich Women's Club, my mother hesitantly joined a local book club. It was a small, intimate group where titles and reputations carried no weight, just a shared love of literature. One evening, over tea and paperbacks, she admitted, "I never knew connections like this could feel so genuine." Changes appeared in their home as well. The extravagant decor, the lavish statement pieces, all gone. In their place, Ethan's colorful drawings lined the walls, alongside newly framed family photos. The Christmas tree, once a towering 12-foot display of opulence, had been replaced by a simpler 6-foot one. But the joy of decorating it together, with laughter and shared stories, made it feel far more meaningful than any grand display ever had. Maybe this is what true luxury really means, my mother mused one evening. Financial worries about retirement haven't disappeared entirely, but for the first time, my parents are facing reality head-on, choosing to live with honesty instead of illusion. Now I see how much we lost to our own pride and vanity, my father admitted one day, his words carrying the weight of both regret and newfound clarity. But the most profound change of all has been in their relationship with Ethan. "Grandpa, thank you for coming to watch my baseball game." Ethan waves to my father from the field, beaming as he spots him in the stands. "Grandma, thank you for helping me with math," he exclaims, wrapping my mother in a hug after she patiently walks him through his homework. A child's love, so pure and unburdened, has begun to mend what was broken. Without hesitation, without conditions, Ethan has opened his heart, offering the gift of forgiveness that only a child can give. One evening, as my mother watches him play, she wipes away silent tears, her thoughts drifting back to the Christmas box, the one she had given him, empty. She will never forget that moment. But now, she understands. Our family is learning to build something new, something real. It's not grand or extravagant. It doesn't sparkle under chandeliers or impress high society. But it is warm. Steady. A happiness that reaches deep, where wealth and status never could. There will be challenges ahead, Caroline reminds us. But now, we know what matters. We know the true meaning of family. Outside, the first signs of spring emerge. Sunlight filters through the branches of the horse chestnut trees on Maple Avenue, their buds beginning to bloom. In the gentle light, I see Ethan in the garden, helping his grandparents tend to the soil, working together, side by side. And the box that was once empty? It is now overflowing, filled with the only treasures that ever truly mattered, love, lessons, and memories we will cherish forever.